Rumors started circulating on Shabbat 1 week ago, late in the afternoon. IDF soldiers operating in the southern Gaza town of Rafah had entered into a tunnel and apparently discovered 6 bodies of hostages, Israelis, who had been taken into Gaza over 300 days earlier on October the 7th. As the night went on, names started to leak out. No one wanted to believe that this was real. And then on Sunday morning, September the 1st, as hundreds of thousands of Israeli kids were waking up across the country, getting ready to head to their first day of school, that's when the news broke. The names of 4 men and 2 women, 6 hostages, were released to the public. Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, 23. Aiden Yerushalmi, 24. Ori Danino, 25. Alex Lobanov, 32. Carmel Gat, 40. And Almog Sarusi, 27. Hashem Yikom Damam. Gat was taken from Kibbutz Be'eri. The rest were abducted from the Nova Music Festival. All 6 had been alive in captivity for nearly 11 months, enduring unimaginable conditions. And they were apparently murdered just before they would have been found. They were killed by Hamas militants, who President Herzog rightly called depraved barbarians, as IDF forces closed in on their location. On Sunday evening, the Hostage Family Forum called on Israelis to take to the streets to demand a hostage deal now, and protests broke out across the country. The Histadrut, the labor union in Israel, announced that on Monday morning, September the 2nd, they would hold a nationwide strike, also to exert pressure on the government to reach a deal. If there was any day that was just as bad as October 7th, for many Israelis and for all of us who love Israel, it could be September the 1st. Given that Israel has endured so many terrible casualties since the start of the war, I've tried to understand why September the 1st hit me, and hit all of us really, so hard. Why did we wake up Sunday morning seeing those faces, hearing those names, to a feeling of unfathomable, bottomless, and heart-rending loss? For me, I think it was the sense that these hostages, who were within an arm's reach away, right within our grasp, we could have potentially brought them home, will now never come home again. It's the finality of it all. We couldn't put a hostage deal together despite months of negotiations, and our soldiers couldn't rescue them, even though they were so very close. And it's all over. The story, at least for these 6, has reached its terrible conclusion. Speaking to my friends in Israel, the loss seems greater. That along with these innocent, loving, kind, creative, curious, and far too young human beings, a part of Israel's soul was buried as well this past week. Some will say what was lost was the very last pretense that there's anything that can be done to get the hostages back. So what we lost, yet again, was the belief in Israel's ability to defend itself. For others, what was lost was the belief that Israel has it within itself to do the right thing, get the remaining hostages home. And for even others, What was lost was confidence that Israel's leaders care sufficiently about the hostages in the first place. We lost 6 innocent souls who somehow managed to survive 11 months of a living hell none of us can begin to imagine, only to be murdered when they were seemingly so close to freedom. But perhaps the acute loss we feel is connected to one of those souls in particular, the American citizen who made Aliyah with his family in 2008 at the age of 7, Hirsch Goldberg, Poland. As long as the agony of Hirsch's captivity endured, we were blessed to see the best of what Israel and the Jewish people can be. Much of that is because of Rachel and John Goldberg, Poland, along with their daughters, who fought tirelessly for the return of their beloved son and brother. And they did so with dignity, passion, and determination. In the months since Hirsch's arm was blown off by a Hamas grenade, and he was thrown bloodied into the back of a pickup truck headed for Gaza, his parents have not stopped. They've had audiences with the President of the United States and even with the Pope. They went to the border with Gaza to scream their son's name. In interviews, they expressed a Zionism that was genuine, a Zionism that also had a place for acknowledging the pain of all the innocent victims, not just Jews. And they displayed throughout a deep religiosity, animated not by hate, but by boundless love. Because of this extraordinary family, Hirsch himself came to symbolize all of these qualities. And when we found out he died, perhaps we lost hope that in the end, right would triumph over might. Good would triumph over evil. Love would triumph over hate. Maybe. It will take a long time to understand precisely what was lost on September the 1st. But in Israel, everyone knows, whatever it was, that something important, something significant died that day. It's a demise that Israelis feel intuitively. I have no moral or political objection to placing a percentage of the blame on Netanyahu and his government, either for their negligence on October the 7th, letting all of it happen in the first place under their watch, or in their responses afterwards. But I do have an issue when that blame seems to be focused on Netanyahu. For whatever criticisms one may have of the current government, and there are many, let's remember that Hamas is, and always has been, responsible for October the 7th and the fate of its victims. Everyone has their opinion about what Netanyahu should have done and could have done. But I would invite us to take a step back for a moment and consider that policy choices made by leaders are often choices between really, really bad option number 1 and somehow even worse option number 2. And with any policy, we can only evaluate and judge the results of the decisions that were made. We have no idea of the short or long-term consequences of the roads that were not taken. It's possible that the Israeli government's decisions after October 7th were the best of terrible options. It's also possible that they made a bad situation worse. It's also possible and probable that it's a little bit of both. It is fair to hold a government accountable for its decisions, and we will see how Israelis feel in the next election. But please, folks, let's reserve our moral outrage for the people who actually deserve it. And there's plenty of that moral outrage to go around. America, Canada, the West, why did you pressure Israel not to go into Rafah for so long? Why did you not use all of the tools at your disposal to pressure countries like Qatar, who host Hamas, to return these hostages? There is no doubt in my mind that if the West told Doha, listen, you're going to lose us as allies if you don't get these hostages returned, some of those hostages would probably have been returned. I'm reading these statements of sorrow from leaders of the free world that have come in this week, and they ring to me so hollow, especially when they come a day late, like the statement that came from our Prime Minister. What we need is a strong message from the West to terrorists and to those who support them, that the defenders of civilization will defeat them, and will defeat them no matter the cost. Let's express our moral outrage to those who really deserve it. Why are there 6 hostages dead? Because of protesters and online narratives and courts and the International Court of Justice that said they didn't have the jurisdiction to implicate Hamas, and everybody in power who's fighting over what the word genocide means but doesn't hold accountable an actual genocide that was occurring in the tunnels, and all the educated and enlightened people who dismiss Jewish victims as white colonizers. They deserve our moral outrage. I really am convinced that every senseless death could have been avoided on October 8th and afterwards had the world just done the right thing and placed blame where it was logically, factually, and legally due, on the terrorists who started this war in the first place and the ones who are refusing to end this war now. With the world's pressure, Qatar and the regime in Iran would threaten to expel Hamas leaders for not cooperating or face the world's wrath. Instead, useful idiots chant in the streets, "We are all Hamas," and bring the war home. So long as there is moral confusion about this war, so long as the world cannot see that there is a fundamental difference between the murder of innocent civilians and the disarming of those who want to do so, sadly, this war is just going to continue, and more innocent people are going to die. Maybe that's what was lost on September the 1st. To Hirsch, Eden, Ori, Alex, Carmel, and Almog, you should know that we prayed for your release in this synagogue every day. We kept you in our minds, we kept you in our hearts. Your faces are still there on the walls of this synagogue, as they have been nearly every day since you were abducted. Many of us in this synagogue wore dog tag necklaces so we could be burdened and bothered so long as your families were burdened and bothered. We did everything we could to speak up for you. And we failed. And it hurts so bad that we failed. We failed you. And the world failed you. The cries of those who pleaded to bring you home went unheard. So God had to bring you home instead. As Rachel Goldberg Poland cried out at her son Hirsch's funeral on Monday, "My sweet boy, finally, 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 you are free." Let us not allow, dear friends, these crushing losses to weaken our conviction. We owe it to Hirsch, but we owe it to much more than him. The popularization of the slogan, "Never Again," was fueled by a spirit of resolve that post-Holocaust Jewish life will dedicate itself to ensuring the survival of the Jewish people. We will not forget that the world watched silently as we walked onto cattle cars. We will not forget that the world watched silently while we returned to our slaughter on ships that were turned away. We will not forget that the world watched silently as the trains made their way to the death camps and unloaded those who survived to gas chambers and crematoria. We will not forget that the world watched silently when the Einsatzgruppen danced and sang while Jews were burned alive in the very synagogues in which they worshipped. We will not forget that the world watched silently as 1.5 million of our children were exterminated and 2 out of every 3 European Jews disappeared. This time, we hoped things had changed. We hoped the world would stop watching silently and would come help. We waited, some of us with our captors in underground tunnels, some of us by the Gaza border, some of us by the door. Maybe somebody in the world would come help Israel, not just the country, but the people. But instead, the world took to the streets and accused us of murder for defending ourselves against the monsters who raped and butchered and burned and kidnapped our loved ones. And the world calls for another intifada and for Judenrein in Israel and for our annihilation from the river to the sea. Well, it's not gonna happen. Our children and our parents and our siblings and our grandparents, they are still in Gaza. Iran and its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, they still pose an existential threat to Israel. Things are still very, very serious, and we are seriously staring right now at the possibility of another Holocaust. So please don't accuse me of being too dramatic. It is the fundamental obligation of a country to defend the security and the lives of its citizens. Fundamental. It was the message of our Parsha this morning, the Parsha which obligates Shotrim v'Shotrim, Shoftim v'Shotrim, Titin lecha bechol she'arecha. You make sure that you have guards at the gates of your city. And when we say never again, it means we will not live peacefully and happily and in security until all existential threats against us have been eliminated. If the world wants a ceasefire, it's very simple. Let our people go. Let them go, you'll get what you want. Otherwise, move aside. We lost a lot on October the 7th. We lost more on September the 1st. But we're not going to march to our deaths as you watch silently anymore. Shabbat Shalom.